Modern slavery did not end. It evolved. Modern slavery did not disappear with the abolition movements of the 19th century. It simply changed form, adapting to new systems, new economies, and new ways of controlling people without drawing attention. When most people hear the word slavery, they immediately think of the past: chains, ships, plantations, and visible brutality. But the truth is far more unsettling. Slavery today no longer needs chains to exist, because control has become more psychological, more economic, and far more hidden. It has evolved into something that blends into everyday life, making it difficult to identify and even harder to confront. Across the world, millions of people are trapped in conditions that meet the definition of slavery, yet their situations are often disguised under terms like employment, migration, or opportunity. They are not always physically restrained, but they are controlled through fear, manipulation, debt, confiscation of documents, or threats against their families. In many cases, victims are aware of their situation, but leaving is not an option, because the systems surrounding them are designed to keep them powerless. This type of control is often more effective than physical force because it removes the ability to resist before resistance can even begin. What makes modern slavery particularly dangerous is how deeply it is embedded in global systems. It is not something happening in isolation or in distant corners of the world. It exists within industries that supply everyday goods and services. From agriculture and construction to manufacturing and domestic work, exploitation is often hidden within supply chains that stretch across continents. This means that the products people use daily may be connected, directly or indirectly, to forced labor, creating a reality where modern slavery is not just a distant issue, but one that intersects with global consumption. Another disturbing aspect of modern slavery is how it often begins. Unlike historical slavery, which relied heavily on force and capture, modern slavery frequently starts with trust. Individuals are promised jobs, education, or a better life, and in their search for opportunity, they unknowingly enter systems designed to exploit them. By the time the truth becomes clear, they are already trapped, isolated from support, unfamiliar with their environment, and often without the resources needed to escape. What began as hope quickly turns into control. The global nature of this issue means that no country is completely free from it. Modern slavery exists in both developing and developed nations, taking different forms depending on the environment. While some regions experience higher levels of vulnerability due to poverty or instability, others contribute through demand for cheap labor and goods. This creates a cycle where exploitation is sustained by both need and consumption, making it a complex problem that cannot be solved by addressing one factor alone. Despite living in an era of advanced technology, global communication, and increased awareness of human rights, modern slavery continues to thrive. One reason for this is that it operates in the shadows of systems that benefit from its existence. Weak enforcement of laws, corruption, and the constant demand for low-cost production create conditions where exploitation can continue with minimal consequences. At the same time, the hidden nature of modern slavery allows it to remain out of sight, reducing public awareness and urgency. Understanding modern slavery requires a shift in perspective. It is not just a historical issue that has already been resolved. It is an ongoing reality that has adapted to the modern world. It exists not because people are unaware of slavery, but because they are unaware of how it has changed. This lack of awareness allows it to continue quietly affecting millions of lives without the attention it deserves. As we begin to uncover the layers of this hidden system, One thing becomes clear. The story of slavery did not end. It was rewritten, it was reshaped, and it continues to exist in forms that are less visible, but just as powerful. Recognizing this truth is the first step toward understanding the scale of the problem, and more importantly, toward addressing it. What people think. Slavery is versus reality. For many people, slavery is something that belongs entirely to the past, a dark and painful chapter that humanity has already confronted and moved beyond. It is often remembered through history lessons, documentaries, and memorials that focus on transatlantic slavery, colonial exploitation, and the visible horrors that define those eras. This understanding creates a powerful but misleading sense of closure, as if slavery was a problem that was solved, confined to a specific time in history. But this perception, while comforting, is incomplete. And in many ways, it is part of the reason modern slavery continues to exist without the level of attention it demands. The traditional image of slavery is clear and unmistakable. It is associated with physical chains, forced transportation, and open ownership of human beings. It is visible, undeniable, and universally condemned. Because of this, people tend to believe that if slavery were still happening today, it would look the same way. They expect it to be obvious, to be easily identifiable, and to exist only in extreme or lawless environments. However, modern slavery does not operate in this way. It has evolved into something far more subtle, blending into systems that appear normal, legal, and even necessary within the global economy. In reality, modern slavery is defined not by ownership in the traditional sense, but by control. It is about the ability to restrict a person's freedom, to exploit their labor, and to prevent them from leaving through various forms of coercion. This control can be psychological, financial, legal, or social, making it much harder to detect. A person may appear to have a job, a place to live, and a role in society, yet still be trapped in conditions where they have no real freedom or choice. This creates a dangerous illusion, where exploitation is hidden behind the appearance of normal life. One of the key differences between historical and modern slavery is visibility. In the past, slavery was often a public institution, openly practiced and legally recognized in many societies. Today, it exists in the shadows, often concealed within legitimate industries and business operations. This makes it more difficult for outsiders to recognize, especially when victims themselves may not fully understand their situation at first. Many individuals enter these conditions believing they are pursuing legitimate opportunities, only to realize later that they have been deceived or manipulated. Another important factor is the role of vulnerability. Modern slavery often targets individuals who are already in difficult situations, those living in poverty, facing unemployment, lacking access to education, or seeking to migrate for better opportunities. These vulnerabilities are exploited by individuals and networks that promise a way out, offering jobs, training, or relocation. What begins as a hopeful opportunity can quickly turn into a situation of control, where the individual becomes dependent on those exploiting them, with limited options for escape. This disconnect between perception and reality is one of the most powerful tools that allows modern slavery to persist. Because people believe slavery no longer exists, they are less likely to recognize it when it does. This lack of awareness extends beyond individuals to institutions and communities, creating an environment where exploitation can continue without being challenged. Even when signs are present, they may be overlooked or misunderstood because they do not match the expected image of slavery. Modern slavery also benefits from the complexity of global systems. Supply chains, labor markets, and migration networks are interconnected in ways that make it difficult to trace the origins of goods and services. This complexity creates layers of separation between consumers and the conditions under which products are made. As a result, exploitation can exist within these systems without being immediately visible to those who benefit from them. This does not mean that people intentionally support slavery, but rather that the structure of modern economies allows it to remain hidden. The reality is that slavery did not end, it adapted. It shifted from being a visible institution to a hidden system, from physical ownership to psychological and economic control. It became more sophisticated, more flexible, and more difficult to confront. And until this reality is fully understood, it will continue to operate beneath the surface, affecting millions of people whose stories are rarely seen or heard. Recognizing the difference between what people think slavery is and what it actually looks like today is a critical step. It challenges assumptions, exposes hidden systems, and opens the door to deeper understanding. Because once the illusion is broken, it becomes impossible to ignore the truth that modern slavery is not a thing of the past, but a present reality that exists all around us, often in ways we least expect. The many faces of modern slavery. Modern slavery does not exist in a single form, and that is what makes it so difficult to identify, confront, and eliminate. Unlike the historical systems that were more uniform and visible, modern slavery has evolved into a complex network of practices that adapt to different environments, industries, and vulnerabilities. It does not always look the same, and it does not follow one pattern. Instead, it appears in multiple forms, each shaped by the conditions in which it exists, but all connected by a single reality, the removal of freedom and the exploitation of human beings for profit. One of the most widespread forms of modern slavery is forced labor, where individuals are made to work under conditions they cannot escape. This often occurs in industries such as agriculture, mining, construction, and manufacturing, where labor is in high demand and regulation may be weak or poorly enforced. Workers may be promised fair wages and safe conditions, only to find themselves trapped in environments where they are underpaid, overworked, and constantly monitored. In many cases, they are unable to leave because of threats, withheld wages, or the fear of losing what little they have. Their labor becomes a tool for profit, while their rights are quietly stripped away. Another major form is human trafficking, which involves the recruitment, transportation, and exploitation of individuals through deception, coercion, or force. Victims are often targeted because of their vulnerability, whether due to poverty, lack of education, or the desire to find better opportunities. They may be promised jobs abroad, education, or a fresh start, only to be moved into unfamiliar environments where they have no support system. Once there, they are controlled, isolated, and exploited in ways that make escape extremely difficult. Human trafficking is not limited to one region or one group of people. It is a global issue that affects men, women, and children across different societies. Debt bondage is another deeply entrenched form of modern slavery, and one that is particularly difficult to break. In this system, individuals take on loans or debts, often out of necessity, and are then required to work to repay them. However, the conditions of repayment are structured in such a way that the debt is never fully cleared. Interest rates may be inflated, additional costs may be added, and wages may be deliberately kept low, ensuring that the individual remains trapped indefinitely. In some cases, this cycle extends beyond one person. affecting entire families and even passing from one generation to the next, creating a system of inherited exploitation. Domestic servitude represents another hidden form of modern slavery, often occurring behind closed doors in private homes. Individuals, frequently women and children, are brought into households under the promise of work, only to find themselves isolated from the outside world. They may be required to work long hours without rest, denied fair pay, and subjected to control or abuse. Because this form of exploitation takes place in private spaces, it is particularly difficult to detect, allowing it to continue without intervention. The lack of visibility makes it one of the most overlooked forms of modern slavery. Forced marriage is also recognized as a form of modern slavery, particularly when individuals are married without their consent and are unable to leave the relationship. This often affects young girls who are placed into situations where they lose control over their lives, their bodies, and their future. While it may be presented as a cultural or traditional practice, the lack of choice and the presence of coercion place it firmly within the framework of exploitation. In these situations, marriage becomes not a union, but a system of control. What connects all these forms is not their outward appearance, but their underlying structure. Each involves the use of power to control another person, the removal of freedom, and the exploitation of that person's labor, body, or existence for gain. The methods may differ, but the outcome is the same. Individuals are placed in situations where they cannot freely choose their path, and their ability to act independently is taken away. These forms of modern slavery thrive in environments where vulnerability exists. Poverty, lack of education, political instability, and limited access to legal protection all contribute to conditions where exploitation can take root. At the same time, demand for cheap labor and services creates incentives for these systems to continue. This combination of vulnerability and demand forms the foundation upon which modern slavery operates, allowing it to adapt and persist across different regions and industries. Understanding the many faces of modern slavery is essential because it challenges the idea that slavery must look a certain way to be real. It forces a shift in perspective, encouraging people to look beyond the obvious and recognize the hidden systems that exist around them. Without this understanding, many forms of exploitation remain invisible, continuing unchecked because they do not match the expected image of slavery. As we begin to see these patterns more clearly, it becomes evident that modern slavery is not a single issue, but a network of interconnected practices that require awareness, recognition, and action. And as we move forward, the next step is to look beyond the structure and into reality, to examine real-world examples that reveal just how close, how widespread, and how present this issue truly is. Real-world examples. The reality behind the system. Understanding modern slavery in theory is one thing, but seeing how it exists in the real world reveals just how close, widespread, and deeply embedded it truly is. It is not confined to distant places or isolated communities. It exists across continents, within industries that power global economies, and in environments that many people would never suspect. The reality is that modern slavery is not hidden because it is rare. It is hidden because it is normalized in certain systems, making it easier to overlook even when it is happening in plain sight. In parts of Asia, for example, forced labor has been documented in industries such as garment manufacturing, fishing, and construction, where workers are often recruited with promises of good wages and stable employment. Upon arrival, however, Many find themselves in conditions that are far from what they were promised. Their passports may be taken away, their movement restricted, and their wages withheld or reduced. They may be required to work long hours under harsh conditions, with little or no ability to leave. These workers produce goods that are shipped across the world, entering markets and reaching consumers who may have no idea of the human cost behind those products. In the Middle East, the sponsorship system known as kafala has been widely criticized for creating conditions that can lead to exploitation, particularly among migrant domestic workers. Individuals travel from countries in Africa and Asia seeking better opportunities, only to find themselves dependent on their employers for legal status, housing, and income. This dependency creates an imbalance of power that can be easily abused. Workers may face long hours, lack of rest, withheld wages, and restrictions on their movement, all while being isolated within private homes where oversight is limited. While not every situation results in exploitation, the structure itself creates conditions where abuse can occur with little accountability. Across parts of Africa, human trafficking networks continue to exploit vulnerable populations, particularly young people seeking opportunities abroad. Individuals are often promised education, jobs, or a chance to build a better future. But upon leaving their home countries, they are drawn into systems of exploitation. Some are forced into labor, while others are pushed into situations where they are controlled through threats, debt, or manipulation. In many cases, victims are far from home, without support systems, making escape extremely difficult. In Europe and North America, modern slavery also exists, though it may take different forms. Forced labor has been identified in sectors such as agriculture, hospitality, and construction, where migrant workers may be underpaid, overworked, and living in conditions that limit their freedom. Human trafficking networks operate in both urban and rural areas, targeting individuals who are vulnerable due to economic hardship, immigration status, or personal circumstances. The idea that modern slavery only exists in developing regions is a misconception. It is a global issue that affects both wealthy and less developed nations. Child labor is another reality that intersects with modern slavery, particularly in industries such as mining and agriculture. In some regions, children are forced to work in dangerous conditions, often to support their families or because they have no alternative. They may be exposed to hazardous environments, denied education, and trapped in cycles of poverty that limit their future opportunities. While not all child labor is classified as slavery, many situations involve exploitation and lack of freedom that align with its definition. What makes these examples so powerful is not just the scale, but the connection between them. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of larger systems that rely on vulnerability, demand, and lack of oversight. They are connected through global networks of trade, migration, and economics, creating a situation where exploitation in one part of the world can directly or indirectly support consumption in another. Another important aspect of these real-world examples is how easily they can go unnoticed. Workers may appear to be going about their daily tasks, businesses may appear legitimate, and products may appear ordinary. Without deeper investigation, the conditions behind these realities remain hidden. This invisibility is not accidental. It is part of what allows modern slavery to continue. When something looks normal, it is less likely to be questioned. At the same time, it is important to recognize that awareness is growing. Governments, organizations, and activists are working to expose these systems, improve regulations, and support victims. However, progress is often slow and challenges remain, particularly in enforcing laws and addressing the root causes of vulnerability. The scale of the issue means that solutions must be comprehensive, addressing not just the symptoms, but the systems that allow exploitation to exist. These real-world examples serve as a reminder that modern slavery is not an abstract concept. It is a lived reality for millions of people. It exists in factories, homes, farms, and cities, often closer than people realize. And as we move forward, the next question becomes even more critical. Not just where it exists, but why it continues to exist in a world that claims to have moved beyond it. Why it still exists. The system behind the silence. If modern slavery is widely condemned and legally prohibited across the world, then the question becomes unavoidable. Why does it still exist? The answer is not simple, because modern slavery is not sustained by a single cause, but by a network of interconnected factors that reinforce one another. It survives because it is embedded within economic systems, protected by gaps in enforcement, fueled by vulnerability, and sustained by demand. It is not just a crime, it is a system that operates quietly within structures that many people depend on, making it far more difficult to dismantle than it appears. One of the primary reasons modern slavery continues is economic demand. The global economy relies heavily on the production of goods and services at the lowest possible cost, and in many cases this creates pressure to reduce labor expenses. When businesses compete to offer cheaper products, the cost is often absorbed somewhere in the supply chain, and that somewhere is frequently labor. This creates an environment where exploitation can thrive, especially in industries where oversight is limited and profit margins are tight. While not all low-cost production involves exploitation, the demand for cheap goods creates conditions where unethical practices can emerge and persist. Another major factor is vulnerability. Modern slavery does not target people randomly. It targets those who are already at risk. Individuals living in poverty, facing unemployment, lacking access to education, or seeking better opportunities are more likely to be drawn into exploitative situations. Migration plays a significant role in this as people move across regions or countries in search of work, often relying on recruiters or intermediaries who may not have their best interests in mind. Once individuals leave familiar environments and support systems, they become more dependent on those controlling their situation, making it easier for exploitation to take hold. Weak enforcement of laws also plays a critical role. While many countries have legislation against human trafficking, forced labor, and exploitation, the effectiveness of these laws depends on how they are implemented. In some regions, enforcement may be limited by lack of resources, corruption, or insufficient training. Even when cases are identified, legal processes can be slow, and victims may be reluctant to come forward due to fear, lack of protection, or uncertainty about their rights. This creates a gap between law and reality, allowing exploitative systems to continue operating with reduced risk of consequences. Corruption further complicates the situation. In some cases, individuals or groups involved in exploitation may have connections that allow them to avoid accountability. This can include bribery, manipulation of legal systems, or influence over local authorities. When systems meant to protect individuals are compromised, it becomes even more difficult to challenge exploitation effectively. Victims may feel that there is no point in seeking help, reinforcing the cycle of silence and control. Another reason modern slavery persists is its hidden nature. Unlike historical slavery, which was often visible and widely recognized, modern slavery is designed to remain out of sight. It operates in private homes, remote work sites, or complex supply chains that are difficult to monitor. This invisibility reduces public awareness and makes it harder for authorities and organizations to identify and address cases. When something is not seen, it is less likely to be questioned, allowing it to continue with a minimal disruption. Social and cultural factors also contribute to the persistence of modern slavery. In some cases, practices that involve exploitation may be normalized or accepted within certain contexts, making it harder to challenge them. This does not mean that exploitation is justified, but it highlights the complexity of addressing issues that are deeply rooted in social structures. Changing these systems requires not only legal action, but also shifts in perception and understanding. The role of global supply chains cannot be ignored. Products often pass through multiple stages of production, involving different companies, contractors, and regions. This complexity creates distance between the final product and the conditions under which it was produced. As a result, businesses and consumers may not have full visibility into the labor practices involved, even if they do not intend to support exploitation. This lack of transparency makes accountability more difficult, allowing unethical practices to remain hidden within legitimate operations. Fear is another powerful factor that keeps modern slavery in place. Victims may fear retaliation, deportation, or harm to themselves or their families if they attempt to escape or report their situation. This fear is often reinforced by isolation, lack of information, and dependence on those controlling them. When individuals feel that they have no safe way out, they are more likely to remain in their situation, even when they recognize the exploitation. All of these factors, economic demand, vulnerability, weak enforcement, corruption, invisibility, social norms, complex supply chains, and fear, work together to create a system that allows modern slavery to persist. It is not sustained by one issue alone, but by a combination of conditions that reinforce one another, making it difficult to address through a single solution. Understanding why modern slavery exists is essential because it shifts the focus from individual cases to the larger system. It highlights the need for comprehensive approaches that address root causes, improve enforcement, increase transparency, and support vulnerable populations. Without this understanding, efforts to combat modern slavery risk addressing only the surface, while the underlying system remains intact. As we move forward, the next step is to look even deeper, not just at why the system exists, but at who benefits from it, and how those benefits contribute to its continuation in ways that are often overlooked. Who benefits? The hidden profits behind exploitation. When discussing modern slavery, much of the focus is placed on victims, their suffering, their conditions, and their struggle to escape. While this is essential, it only tells part of the story. To fully understand why modern slavery persists, it is necessary to examine the other side of the equation: who benefits from it? Because behind every system of exploitation, there are individuals, businesses, and structures that gain from it, directly or indirectly, and these benefits create powerful incentives for the system to continue. At the most immediate level, those who directly control victims, traffickers, exploitative employers, and intermediaries profit from forced labor and human exploitation. They reduce or eliminate labor costs, maximize output, and operate in ways that prioritize profit over human rights. For them, individuals are not seen as people, but as resources to be used. This mindset allows exploitation to continue with little regard for the long-term consequences, as the focus remains on immediate financial gain. However, the system does not stop at those directly involved. Modern slavery is often embedded within larger economic structures, where businesses may benefit from low-cost labor without always being directly involved in exploitation. In complex supply chains, companies may source materials or products from multiple layers of suppliers, some of which may engage in unethical practices. While not all companies are aware of these conditions, the demand for lower costs can create pressure that encourages such practices to exist somewhere within the chain. This creates a situation where profit is maintained, while responsibility becomes diffused. Consumers also play a role, though often unintentionally. The demand for affordable goods, clothing, electronics, food, and services drives industries to reduce costs wherever possible. This demand creates a market where cheap labor becomes a competitive advantage. While most consumers do not support exploitation knowingly, the structure of global markets makes it difficult to fully trace the origins of products. This disconnect allows modern slavery to exist within systems that appear normal and accessible, linking everyday consumption to hidden labor conditions. Governments and institutions can also benefit indirectly, particularly when economic growth is prioritized over strict enforcement of labor standards. In some cases, industries that rely on cheap labor contribute significantly to local or national economies, creating a reluctance to fully address underlying issues. While many governments actively work to combat exploitation, gaps in enforcement, resource limitations, or competing priorities can result in situations where economic benefits overshadow the need for immediate action. Another layer of benefit comes from the structure of globalization itself. As production and labor are distributed across different regions, businesses gain access to lower-cost environments, while consumers gain access to cheaper products. This system, while efficient, creates conditions where oversight becomes more difficult, and accountability is spread across multiple actors. In this environment, exploitation can exist without being directly tied to a single entity, making it harder to identify and address. What makes this system particularly challenging is that many of those who benefit from it are not actively seeking to exploit others. Instead, they operate within structures that allow exploitation to exist as a hidden byproduct. This does not remove responsibility, but it highlights the complexity of the issue. It is not always a matter of clear intent, but of systems that prioritize efficiency and cost over transparency and accountability. At the same time, there are those who actively resist these systems, organizations, activists, and businesses that work to promote ethical practices, improve transparency, and support victims. Their efforts demonstrate that change is possible, but also highlight the scale of the challenge. Addressing modern slavery requires not only identifying those who benefit, but also reshaping the systems that allow those benefits to exist. Understanding who benefits from modern slavery shifts the conversation from isolated incidents to systemic dynamics. It reveals that exploitation is not sustained by a single group, but by a network of incentives that operate at different levels. This understanding is essential for creating effective solutions, because it shows that addressing modern slavery requires changes not only in enforcement, but in how systems are structured, how businesses operate, and how consumers engage with the global economy. As we move toward the conclusion, one final question remains. If modern slavery is so deeply embedded within global systems, what does this mean for the future? And what role does awareness play in changing the trajectory of this issue? Awareness, responsibility, and the path forward. As we bring everything together, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Modern slavery is not a distant problem, and it is not a closed chapter in history. It is a present reality, shaped by systems, sustained by demand, and hidden within structures that many people interact with every day. But while the scale of the issue may seem overwhelming, awareness has the power to change how it is understood and ultimately how it is addressed. The first step toward change is recognition. For too long, modern slavery has remained in the shadows, not because it does not exist, but because it does not match the image people expect. By understanding how it operates, where it exists, and why it continues, individuals and communities become better equipped to identify it and respond. Awareness breaks the illusion that slavery is a problem of the past, replacing it with a clearer, more accurate understanding of the present. Responsibility is the next step, and it exists at multiple levels. Governments have a responsibility to enforce laws, protect vulnerable populations, and ensure that systems are designed to prevent exploitation. Businesses have a responsibility to examine their supply chains, promote transparency, and prioritize ethical practices. Consumers, while often removed from the source of production, also have a role to play by supporting responsible companies and staying informed about the impact of their choices. Each of these roles is interconnected, and meaningful change requires action across all levels. At the same time, it is important to recognize that addressing modern slavery is not just about stopping exploitation. It is about addressing the conditions that allow it to exist. Poverty, lack of education, limited access to opportunities, and inequality all contribute to vulnerability. Efforts to combat modern slavery must therefore include strategies that empower individuals and strengthen communities and create alternatives that reduce the risk of exploitation. Without addressing these root causes, the system is likely to adapt and continue in new forms. Technology and global communication also play an important role in shaping the future. Information can now be shared more widely and more quickly than ever before, making it possible to expose hidden systems and connect efforts across regions. This creates opportunities for collaboration, innovation, and accountability that were not possible in the past. At the same time, it requires careful use to ensure that awareness leads to meaningful action rather than temporary attention. There is also a growing movement toward transparency and ethical practices within industries. More organizations are recognizing the importance of responsible sourcing, fair labor conditions, and accountability within supply chains. While progress may be gradual, these efforts demonstrate that change is possible when awareness is combined with commitment and action. Ultimately, the story of modern slavery is not only about exploitation, it is about the choices that shape systems. It is about how economies are structured, how opportunities are distributed, and how people respond to the realities they uncover. While the existence of modern slavery reflects deep challenges, the increasing awareness of the issue reflects a shift toward confronting those challenges rather than ignoring them. The future will be shaped by how these questions are answered. Will systems continue to prioritize cost over human dignity? Or will they evolve to reflect a more balanced approach? Will awareness remain at the level of information, or will it lead to meaningful change? These are questions that extend beyond any single individual or institution. They are questions about the direction of society as a whole. Modern slavery may have adapted to survive in the present, but it is not beyond change. Like any system, it exists because conditions allow it to exist, and those conditions can be challenged, reshaped, and improved. The path forward is not simple, but it is possible, and it begins with understanding, awareness, and the willingness to see what has been hidden for far too long.